Alrighty, on with the show. This is the next episode in the series of Beginner's Guide for Inkstitch version 3.1.0. I have the first episode is just an overview and how to install it. The second one is more of an overview of some of the different things you can use in Inkstitch, some of the different tools. The third one, Satin Stitch. Deep dive into Satin Stitch. I did forget one thing on that one that I remembered right after I did it. I'll put that into the follow-up video that will be the Q&A and comments and all that. And it is the auto route Satin Stitch. It's pretty self-explanatory, but it's two satin stitches together. Use auto route and it'll auto route without having jumps in between the two. But this is the fourth one. This one is all about fill. Anything in Inkscape that is a fill object will be a fill stitch in Inkstitch. So I drew this box out. You can see the outline. Might be some fill in there, I'm not sure. But if I go to fill and stroke, which I have right here, you can also get to that with object fill and stroke. Get you to the same spot. If you have no fill, which this has no fill, this will not be a fill stitch. It has a stroke. I'm going to turn that stroke off. I'm going to turn fill on. Now it has a fill. Now it is a fill object, therefore it is a fill stitch. Just by default, just like it is, this will stitch. If we go to Inkstitch params, now we can start messing around with different params in a fill stitch. That is your standard fill. We're going to go down through here and we're just going to change things. I'm going to get the fill method in a minute. A couple other things I want to talk about first. Expand. This expand will actually make your fill bigger by a certain amount in all directions. So just to exaggerate, I'm going to set this to 10. It does not change the underlay. So the underlay is going to stay the same while your expand is going to be expanded. So the reason I did the very exaggerated example is so you can see this with the understitch versus the expanded overstitch. Set that back to 0. You can change the angle. I'm going to change it to a 45-degree angle. The underlay will do the opposite. So if it's a 45-degree angle on the overlay, it's going to be a negative 45-degree angle on the underlay. Set that back to 0. Gap filling. Add extra rows to compensate for gaps between sections caused by distortions. Rows are always added in pairs, so this number will be rounded up to the next multiple of 2. I think this is a fix for, in the older version, every now and then you would get a incomplete fill. The last line or two would not fill out. And I think this is a fix for that. We'll see if it shows up in the preview. It kind of did. There's an extra line down here, looks like. Set that back to 9. Maximum fill stitch length. So that is how far it goes before it puts another stitch in. And if I select display needle points, you can see these needle points here. They should theoretically be every 3 millimeters unless it's on an edge. So I'm going to exaggerate again. I'm going to set that to 6. We should have a lot less needle points. And we do. Set that back to 0. Spacing between rows. The default. Oh, why did that get suddenly so ugly? Oh, because default's supposed to be 3. Okay. Now we're back to normal. I'm going to turn off the needle points. Spacing between rows. This is how dense you're going to have it stitch out. The default's 0.25. I'm going to exaggerate in this direction, go 1 mil. You'll see that it's a lot further apart. I want to emphasize that the underlay is also much further apart. And the way Inkstitch works by default is the underlay is, if I remember right, it's a 1/4, no, it's, okay, handy dandy little inkstitch.org website. It's ×3 is what it is. I used to know that. Don't mess with it much anymore. Most of the time I just unset it or set it default or set it to 1 every time. But it's defaults to 3 times the spacing of the top layer. And what that means is if I do spacing between rows of 3.3, then we're real close to 1 on the underlay. Nope, that ain't right. I did that backwards. 1 should be 3 on the underlay. There we go. I'll get there in a minute. So 513, set it to 3, 513. There you go. So we'll go back to default, which is 0.25. So that means our underlay is 0.75. So that is default, and it's default by not filling anything in. Now you can change this if you want your fill stitch to stay at 0.25, but you want less underlay, which sometimes is handy if you need to do a few less stitches. You can set that to 1. You can set that to 2. You can set that to anything you want it to be. And again, let's go back to this one. The angle line of stitches. The underlay does the opposite angle of stitches, but you can set a angle on the underlay. So you can set angle line of stitches. I want to set -20. And then on the underlay, I'm going to set -40. So you can really do things there. I'm going to set that back to default, back to default. The inset. This is how far inside your underlay is. So again, I'm going to exaggerate. I'm going to go ahead and set 1. Now you can see that there's 1 mil in difference on the sides. That underlay is quite a bit smaller. It's basically the same thing as the expand on the overlay is basically the same thing as inset, but in reverse. If you set a positive number, it shrinks it. Set that back to none. You can do a skip last row. This underpath is all this squiggly line stuff underneath, which if you have a fairly thick underpath, it's going to hide it anyway. And then the underpath that you see here and here is on the overlay underpath. So you can actually turn both of those off. Let me go back. Let me set that back to 0. And get rid of that inset. Turn that back on. And there can be reasons why you would turn underlay off when you're doing some kind of a pattern or one of the other optional fill methods, which we'll get to shortly. Stagger as many rows before repeating. It's default to 4. Length of cycles by which successive stitch rows are staggered. Fractional values are allowed and can have less visible diagonals than integer values. I've never used that. I don't know a lot about it. Pull compensation. When you stitch, say you have 2 fill stitches side by side, if your stitches on both of those objects are horizontal, there's going to be a pull effect on both of those away from each other, and you're going to end up with a gap in the middle. Pull compensation will compensate for that to some extent, and it works exactly like pull comp in the satin stitch. You can set a You can set a certain number or you can set a percentage. Does the same thing, just in a percentage amount. Skip last stitch in each row, just like the underlay has. Underpath, I just showed you that. Turn that back on. Running stitch length. What that is this underpath is a running stitch. It's not considered part of the fill stitch. So if I turn on my dots here, my needle points, kind of hard to see. Let's set spacing between rows to 2. So the running stitch length, this is the running stitch. If I set that way down, you'll see more needle points in that running stitch, just like you see there. Turn that off. Let's go back up here to spacing. Let's put that back to 0.25. Randomize stitch length. It just randomizes the distance between each stitch. Random seed, you can change it. Minimum stitch length. If you have stitch length set to 3 and you set a minimum stitch length of 1 mil, and that last stitch happens to be less than 1 mil from the edge of your fabric or your design, it's not going to do that last stitch. So keep that in mind. Minimum jump stitch length, pretty self-explanatory. Allow lock stitches. You see me use this a lot in the satin stitches. Gus says I don't have to do this anymore in the new version. I haven't tested it yet, but Gus is the GOAT. I believe what he tells me. So force lock stitches, you can force them if for some reason they're not setting. Tack stitch, I'd never changed this, but there are several options on how to set a tack. And also a lock. Trim after. It will trim after this object, and stop after. Your machine will stop after stitching this object if your machine recognizes Inkstitch commands. Whew, that's a lot. Okay, fill underlay. I'm pretty sure I've covered that already. Everything you hear, fill angle, inset, max stitch length, row spacing. Yep, I did that. Okay. Alrighty, let's get into some of the fill method options. These are just super cool. Under fill method, you've got autofill, which is the standard default that you see here. You have circular fill. Love circular fill. Now, I showed you earlier the option of turning off the underlay. And most of these alternative fill methods, I would turn off the underlay. Hard to tell what's going on there. And this depends on the fabric you're using and your stabilizer and a whole bunch of other things. And I would also turn off underpath so I don't have that running stitch line showing. That is just cool. You also have contour fill, which will follow the shape of your object. Also super cool. Guided fill, and I'm going to set my guide. Let's make it a different color so it's easier to see. And we'll make it a little bigger so it's also easier to see, and I'm going to drag that up here. So I just have that shape that I made selected. I'm going to go to Extensions, Inkstitch, and then Edit, Selection to Guideline, very similar to Selection to Pattern. So yeah, very similar. Select both of those. Both selected. Go to Inkstitch, go to Params. Very cool. Very cool. All right. I like it. And we're going to apply and quit. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So let's see if it kept it. Thinking it shouldn't have, but it may have. Nope. Okay, we're good. So that has to stay there. All right. Let's go back into params to continue along. Short guided fill, linear gradient fill. And what that does is it stitches very light at one side and very heavy at another side. This is good for using color gradients, which we'll get to shortly. But that's what that is. You can do this manually. You can set this to one color, another one to the other color, switch them, and I'll show you all that. Meander fill. Love me some meander fill. And instead of showing you this box, I'm going to show you how I've been using meander fill. So real quickly, I'm going to make a system font that is a fill font. So I'm going to just name it HS for high school, because we have several high schools around here, in the same county. And the meander fill hats I'm doing for the local schools has been an absolute hit. And I'm going to show you what I've been doing. I'm going to, first thing you got to do when you're using system fonts, path, object path, extensions, Inkstitch, fill, break apart. I don't think the break apart's quite as important as it was at one time, but it's still going to be something I do. Now I have two separate objects to work with. Much better idea. Select both of them, turn off stroke, and make sure fill is turned on. Set the color, doesn't matter because it depends on what thread you use anyway, so the color really doesn't matter. And then I'm going to duplicate. I'm going to select both of these. I'm going to go object, group, and then Control D to duplicate that group. The bottom one, remember Inkstitch stitches from the bottom up in this object layer. So in the first one, I want that to fill. I want that to be a params. I want that to be a meander fill. I'm going to set meander fill. And I'm going to turn off the underlay, turn off the under path. It looks like it's already off. I guess it's off when that meander fill's selected. That's good. And then meander pattern scale. This is kind of big to see what's going on, so I'm gonna set this down a little bit to maybe 40. And keep in mind, you have other meander fill patterns in here to play around with. Lots of them. But I'm just going to pick that first one as an example. There's my meander fill. That's it. That's all you got to do for the meander fill. Now on the second one, this one I'm doing a satin stitch. You can use the same satin stitch color, and that's a pretty cool effect. Or you can do a different one. If your high school has two colors, like say for some reason the high school that I'm talking about is red and purple, then in this case I would go into fill, turn off fill, set stroke style to 3, maybe 2.5. 3's a little much. 2.5 looks better. And then extensions Inkstitch, tools satin, convert line to satin. So just like that, I have a hit design just that quick with meander fill. It is amazing. I'm going to show you what this looks like in a simulate. Just really neat. Really neat. It's a hit. All right. Let's get rid of satin layer. Let's see what I can do in the, see if I can keep doing this in the letters. Params. Meander fill. Tartan. Now tartan is very cool. There's your tartan. So you can see that the params for tartan fill really doesn't have a lot of tartan options. So what you need to do is apply and quit. Now you can go to extensions Inkstitch, tools fill, tartan. There is a separate tartan option. Here you can select different colors, and we'll select something similar to what I had for red. And I'm going to select, what did I have? Pink? Sure, custom. Close can I get to a pink? Down here. Sure, something like that. Okay. And I'll have to check that to turn that color on. So there's my multiple color tartans. I'm going to select another color just because to make it stand out a little bit more. Might not be able to see that on the screen very good. Now you can see it on the screen pretty good. You have symmetrical reflective effect, or set, and equal thread count, warp and weft. You have a palette code, you have embroidery settings, embroidery element, SVG elements, angle line of stitches, it's automatically 45, rows per tartan 2, row spacing 0.25, and you can set all those settings accordingly. And hit apply. That is your tartan settings. I go back into Inkstitch params. Now I get those color settings accordingly. And once I flip off of tartan, the next one is legacy. And it's basically the old style fill. Hit apply and quit. So we took a very brief look at the gradient options in the params. I want to show you a more in-depth gradient fill. So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to create another box. Of course, it has an outline, so fill and stroke. I need fill, I need no stroke. Now, under fill, this is a standard fill that you use most of the time. Come over here to the next one, you have linear gradient. I'm going to select linear gradient, but I want the gradient, yes, I do want it to go that way. So you can set how much gradient you have by sliding these two bars over, that one and that one. And you can actually slide them over here closer to center so that you just have a little bit of gradient going on in the middle. And I think that's what we're going to work with on this. We're going to have the two sides are going to be solid color, and yeah. So I want this color right here to be a different color. And we need to bring that alpha channel up, and now we look pretty good. I'm going to separate them out a little bit more to something like that. So this is a gradient block. What can we do with a gradient block? Let's check out Inkstitch Fill Tools. Convert to gradient blocks. How handy. All right, let's convert that to a gradient block. Hit close. I have a single red here, a single blue here. Oops. Dadgummit. Edit, redo. Okay. A single block here. And then in the middle, I have two of the colors on top of each other. And what that does is Inkstitch automatically sets it as a gradient fill. So we'll check out what that looks like. Extensions, Inkstitch, params. Now it fills the red, now it fills that red, now it fills the blue, and then it fills the solid blue. So to see really what's going on, we are going to select that one, extensions, Inkstitch params. So we're only selecting that one, and it will be a gradient fill. So if you notice, we actually have a couple extra things over here. Spacing between rows, which we always have, but end row spacing. That end row spacing, I'm going to exaggerate that so you can really get an idea of what's going on. The big gap on the left, that is end row spacing. And when it gets over here to the right, those last couple of stitches are going to be at the closer to the 0.25 mark. So I'm going to undo that. Okay, it's not going to let me undo it. What was it? I don't remember what it was. I'm going to set it to 1 because I don't remember what it was. Let's open the other one and let's see what it was. Extension Inkstitch. Params. Okay, 0.5. Now you may decide that as these half mils are stitching together, that you're ending up too dense. Just make those end row spacings a little bit more, and you should be good. So let's go back into the other one. Actually, let's go ahead and select both of those. Extensions, Inkstitch params. We'll raise that last number up a little bit again, not quite so much. 0.75, let's do that. Hit apply and quit. And then let's go to extensions, Inkstitch, visualize, and stitch plan preview. We'll do a realistic view, high quality, and move it beside canvas. Hit apply. Hit close. So there you can see kind of a preview of what the gradient would look like. And do some test runs and test it out. Make sure it's getting there where you want it to be. But that's how a gradient fill works in Inkstitch. It is one of the coolest things about Inkstitch to be able to do that. It's so cool. The very first gradient fill video that I did on this channel, gradient fill wasn't even an option yet. They had it built in, but they didn't have it defined on how graphical user interface was going to work, the GUI. So you could go into the back end and do it, but it wasn't ready for public consumption yet. That was the first gradient fill video that I did. So since Fail Stitch doesn't want to be outdone, it can also do patterns. And after Gus watched my last video, he showed me how much easier way to make a tiling pattern like I did from one block at a time, copy, 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 paste, paste, paste. He said there's a much easier way to do this. Gus is awesome. He is the GOAT. He knows Inkstitch more than I do. He definitely knows more about Inkscape than I do. And he's always my go-to if I got a question or comment or whatever. Gus is the man. Gus is part of the Facebook group. And I recently got him to join Reddit. I don't know how long that's going to last. Reddit has a problem of not being able to put pictures in comments. That part sucks, but it is what it is. Anyway, he showed me how to do this, so I'm going to do this. First of all, we're going to make a block just like I did in the other video. Just like that. And I'm going to try to make that a little easier for y'all to see. Maybe? No? Maybe? I'm also going to make it just a little bit thinner. There we go. Okay. So I can take this and I can go path effects, drop down. We're going to look for tiling, which is right here. Boom. It's already there, but I need it to be bigger. Now you can stretch this and make all the boxes bigger, or I'm actually going to stretch this and make all the boxes a little smaller. And then you can change the number of rows and columns right here, rows and columns. But wait, there's more. I'm going to move this over the top. Make sure I have all the numbers I need. I'm going to go another column and I'm going to go some more rows. Sure, something like that. Now, check this out. Check this out. Gap X. You can actually put a gap in there in between those, that X area. So I'm going to come back down. And while you're still operating on it, if you decide that's what I want, but there's a lot of waste over here, you can reduce the number of columns. How cool. But wait, there's more. Do the same thing with the Y. Again, there's more. So I'm going to get rid of those. I can get rid of that, and I'm going to slide this down so it's something similar to that Now, check this out. Offset right here. Offset is cool. Just like magic. That is cool. And then scale and rotate. You can rotate blocks. That is cool. In fact, let's do just a little bit, just because we're playing. Let's do that. And now we go path, object to path, and then I don't think I need all those. I don't. Oh, they didn't go into my layer. That's what the problem is. I'm going to select these two, go path, and nope, object, and group. And let's see if it'll drop into that layer. It will. Not necessary, but it's a little neater. Okay, so now that it's in the group, you can turn this. Yeah, you can turn this new pattern that we just created into an Inkstitch pattern. So we're going to go edit, selection to pattern. There's our little icon indicating that it is a pattern indeed. And then we're going to preview it. Extensions Inkstitch params. Let's look at stitches. There's our pattern. That is cool. All right, let's do a realistic. Before we do a realistic, we should be able to hide this pattern and it stay active. So we're going to check that out. Extensions Inkstitch, visualize, stitch plan preview. Hit close. There it is. Voila. But that is just cool. Delete that and we'll go back in here. Okay, so there's something else. You can actually set your start and end point on your fill. Go to Extensions Inkstitch params. We're going to see where this starts and ends. Starts at the top right. Ends at the bottom left. Let's change that. Let's go to Extensions Inkstitch commands. Attach commands to selected objects. And fill start and end position. Apply and quit. Or apply rather. Close. Now you have visual buttons to move around. And with your selector tool selected, grab the icon, not the bar. Okay, control and select. We'll select just that command marker. And I'm going to move that over here. You'll notice that the little bar stays attached. I'm going to move that over here. I'm going to move the end one. Control, click. I'm going to move that end one over here too. So now it's going to start top right and end at top right. Let's see how that worked out for me. Extensions Inkstitch params. Started on the top right and it did a running stitch all the way around, and then it will finish at the top right. It actually, I didn't put it exactly at the top, so it did stop exactly where I told it to stop. Hit apply and quit. I'm going to change that start position to start over here. Let's see how that works out for me. Extensions Inkstitch params. And again, it did a running stitch from there all the way down, and then it started stitching. But the path maker in Inkstitch is going to figure out how to accommodate your wishes. And if it's got to do it with running stitches, it's going to do it with a running stitch. Apply and quit. All right, so let's just go ahead and select all that. We're going to start over. I don't know why it keeps going to not fill. Okay. So I once used a fill stitch to make a old style grate, an old grate, or grate style sign, and I'll show you how I did that. And this is going to be a rough example of how I did that. Pretty rough example. Okay, so I'm going to select my nodes tool. I'm going to neaten this up just a little bit because that's going to bother me. Yeah, that's pretty good, I guess. Okay, we'll go with that. Now, with the nodes tool selected, I want at least these. I think I just want these to have some curve to them. And I'm going to drop them all down just a little bit. Oh yeah. Now we're cooking with gas. I'm going to set my width on that just a little more. Let's go with 6. Yeah. So there's my old style grate. And I'm going to go in here to fill and stroke. I'm going to turn on fill. I'm going to turn off stroke. So what I did is super simple. What I did is extensions Inkstitch params. I went in here, I did angle line of stitches at 45. And I went with no underpath. I went to fill underlay and turn to off underpath. Go back to the overlay. Oh yeah, we're getting there. Check this out. Now, space between rows. Let's set that to 2. Let's see what that looks like. That's, nope, I want more than that. So set it to 4. Now go to fill underlay and set max row spacing to also 4. And just like that, you have an old style grate, like a sign, like you'll often see over a road in old town districts. There's your old town grate sign, just like that. Super cool. And one stitch probably isn't going to be enough. So what I did for that is I just apply, go into here and duplicate. So now it's just going to make 2 stitch layers of the same thing. And very similar to a bean stitch on a running stitch, just going over it twice. So let's go to Inkstitch Visualize. Hit apply. Close. There it is. How cool. I mean, super simple. Thinking outside of the box. That is something very cool you can do with it. Fill stitch. Very simple, very easy, very effective effect. So that's all I can think of to cover in this video. I'm probably going to remember something that I missed in about 5 minutes from now. But again, if I miss something and I remember it or you call me out on it, I'll catch it in that last remaining video where I fix my mistakes. But other than that, as always, thanks for watching.